welcome to this episode of Tuesdays with the Disability Policy for All. This is the third episode of our Research for All series to make research accessible to people with disability. Today I'm interviewing my friend Shea Tanis from the Lifespan Institute at the Kansas University Centers on Developmental Disability. She works on the Data Project, State in Intellectual and Developmental Disability, which collects data on the types of support people with disability receive across the United States. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks, Liz. It's our pleasure.
What data is available through the State of the States project?
Well, thanks for having us, Liz, and also, really excited to share information about our project of national significance. There are 3 ongoing longitudinal data projects of national significance, and we are one of the 3. And when we collect our data focuses on expenditures for services and supports. So we track the money. The easy thing to say is we are the entity that tracks the money. And so we look at trends in the expenditures across states and across the nation in services and support. So how much money is spent and how many people are receiving that type of funding to do the things that they want to do across the nation.
Thank you. What types of questions can we answer with this data?
That's great. There are a lot of questions we can answer. And I think, we did recently with the other projects, highlighted the 5 most frequently asked questions for each of the projects of national significance. And so I'll highlight our 5. So the 5 for the state of the states is how much do states spend for people with IDD and their families and services? What type of technology supports are they receiving and how much do we spend to receive those technology solutions? How has spending changed over time? So our database goes back to 1977. We've have data on how much we've spent for different types of services like community living and institutional settings. How much do we spend for different types of services? So while our friends at the RISC Project and at Boston also collect data on residential and employment settings, we collect the money and analyze the money for those different types of supports and services. So we look at how much do we spend for services over time in each state. How does that change? We look at how states differ in the way that they spend their money and the investments that they make. And that's just kind of the beginning. Those are the big questions that we start with. And so you'll find that as well as a lot of our other questions on the website that we have. So our stateofthestates.ku.edu website has all of the data in various different forms. We have our accessible data bites that we use that are 1-page snapshots that you can also see some of that data. So those are some highlights.
Thank you. How can a person like me or a member of Congress use this data?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think, you and I have had some great conversations about how we have to humanize the data. The data is not just a number, it's a person. And so we talk about data in our project. We use this kind of quote from Dear Data, which is data is the beginning of the story, not the end, and should be used as a starting point to kind of ask questions and understand the world around us. And so we encourage people to start with the data and then begin to ask the questions. So Congress, and you and I talked about this on our recent presentation with the data ambassadors, which was, here's a data element. There's 15,281 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities still living in institutional settings. The question you had, which was a great question, is why? That begins the questions. So we use the data to tell the stories. We use the data to begin the conversation and do deeper dives into what can we change and how can we support what people want, what do they need by using the data. So the other thing we do in our data bites is online. We open that forum to the community to say, what kind of data do you want to see? What are the questions you want to ask? We like to have this interactive procedure where the community can submit their questions, and that's where we come up with our data bites. We have our data bites that are around the questions that the community needs to be answering. And that's where the starting point can begin. But it also shows us how much progress we have made over time. It shows us what are our social responsibilities. And we believe that the data in tracking the money is really a measure of our social conscience. Do we invest in the things we say are important to us? And so when we talk to Congress and we talk to advocates, is the money being spent and are the trends focusing the way we want to see them focus? So we have tracked community living and our investments in community living and seen that that has significantly changed from the deinstitutionalization movement. And so we want to see how our society shifts based on what people want and need. And that's how we use the data when we're talking to Congress. It's not just a number. It's, is it telling the stories we want to see it tell?
So it sounds like one of my favorite words is why. Why
Mhm,
is this? Why is that?
mhm.
Um, so it it sort of like answering that question. Why is this?
And why is it not
Yeah,
like this?
yes.
Mhm. And
And
it,
who should be at the table
mhm,
and who
absolutely. Yep, that's exactly what we hope the data can be used for. And like I said, we see sometimes trends going a direction we don't want them to go, right? Sometimes we see money being invested in areas that we don't think is a priority from the community, that the community has said this is not our priority. And the data allows us to show that with having a scale, having a larger scale. So it is the individual story, but it's also a collective whole and the story of what is the community and what they need and want.
that that sounds really interesting. And if people with disability are at the table, those those conversations can be more impactful because
Absolutely.
I believe that we can get a deeper dive into why is this the case.
Hmm.
The last question is, what are some recent or important key findings from the data collected?
Good question. Well, we always do talk about total expenditures. So, how much are we spending as a nation? And we want to make sure that we see those trends continue, as I said, in the direction we want, and that's an increase. So, over time, we have tracked again from early years, beginning in 1977, the total expenditures for IDDs, services, and supports. And our most recent data, the fiscal years 2021 data, and we're collecting 22 and 2023 now, we show that $80.6 billion was spent over in the nation on IDD services and supports. Now, the number itself is an important value, but also, are we continuing to see that increase? We've seen a decrease in the spending in our longitudinal data twice. We saw an interesting little plateau in 2020, but back up in 2021. So that's an important data point. Another important data point that a lot are looking at is the types of supports. And one of the great things we have seen is an increase in family support over time, and as well as increasing in supported living. I think what's interesting to see in some of the data is that with the family support, it's very much a handful of states that are causing the increase to go up significantly. So what is it that those states are doing that may be different from others? And then the final thing we capture, which is nuanced to the state of the states, is really technology and how much we're investing in technology solutions. And between what was our data from 2019 to 2021, we saw an increase of 34%, 35% in the investments in technology. And a lot of that had to do with the pandemic and the need to transition to different types of solutions when we weren't able to be in person. And so, as we talk about what longitudinal data can show, it can show how significant social impacts can really make a change and transform. What this is doing is really transforming the type of services and supports that are available to people. So we're seeing as the need changes, so does the data, which is exactly why we do this longitudinal analysis to be able to see, replicate, change, and transition and pivot as need be. So those are some of the more interesting outcomes, but there's a lot in what is our data, and you can see in those 5 questions.
That sounds really fascinating. One of the fascinations I had, are we getting, is my life better now that the pandemic is over? Can I, how, I'm not being I'm I don't need to stay home. I can visit with friends. I can visit with coworkers. And how is that impacting on my health?
Mhm. These are all really good questions and ones we're just starting to scratch the surface on. Because I will tell you, the transition in service delivery, I mean, in my opinion, we're at a really critical point in what has been our nation's concept of service delivery. How can things be delivered? The pandemic gave us an opportunity to reevaluate. It gave us an opportunity as well as some flexibilities to try new things. And I think we're just now seeing what may be the openings and opportunities that are provided if we think a little bit differently about how services can be delivered. And Liz, your point is perfect. It's spot on. It's, well, we pivoted, we made a change, but what's the quality of that change? And hopefully what we'll be able to see is, well, we made this change. We can show the data that the change is there for. And then we need the advocates to say, okay, do we want to see this change continue? Do we want to see these investments over time continue in one way or another? But that's where the advocacy comes in. That's where the stories to the data come in. I think we'll be able to find over time that the advocates and people who actually have the services can create the services that they want by taking information like longitudinal data and showing that we want to see this increase. We want to continue the conversation around these new investments that we were able to make during the pandemic.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your time, Shay. And I look forward to talking with you, with everyone next month. Thank you and have a nice day. Bye.
Bye, Liz. Thank you.